Starting in a minute.
Вітання.
Thank you for coming. I will introduce myself. I am Liudmyla Yankina. I am from the Center of Information on Human Rights. I am also the head of the project that we'll be representing today and the head of the survey. I would like to thank all those who supported this project. The survey was done as part of the initiative of the development of think tanks, executed by the Renaissance Foundation with the financial support of the Finnish embassy in Ukraine. How it all started in the country and in our project, probably we need to start from saying that in the country, before we started feeling the problems with human rights, and I'm sorry, please turn off your mobile phones. The country had minimum 3 chances to change the situation, not to have systemic violations of human rights. First time after the independence was gained, we had the chance when there was the chance to recognize as non-constitutional the provision of the passport borders. The provision on being registered or not being registered, that was quite a brave decision. That was a chance to change the concept of relations between the state and the citizen. We had to move away from Soviet type concept to the human-oriented type system. In 2 years, the law was passed on free choice of the place of residence and freedom of movement. And that law had to give us the chance to change the concept. And that law was passed so that some democratic values started working in our country. We had some international commitments. But for 13 years, we've been observing how the concept of the relations between the state and the citizen has not changed. In the end of 2015, another law was passed, and that is to protect the rights of IDPs. But even thanks to this law, the concept of relations hasn't changed. Nevertheless, all the social payments and pensions for IDPs are tied up to the place of registration. So still the old Soviet system makes a person dependent on administrative services. The whole system is oriented not on the person but on a process for the sake of the process. And by this project, we want to change this concept. And now there is a survey made, and we would like to show what the problem is, what could be the consequences of that problem in the future. And first of all, I would like to mention who are the target audience who suffers from changes not taking place.
З якимось там хвостиком років нас в першу чергу потерпали від цього.
So IDPs are suffering, and especially the representatives of Roma community, they cannot receive their documents, their passports, and they are in the process of very difficult administrative traps, because this is a complicated system and it does not help them. After military conflict started, we received 2 more categories of people, the life of who is complicated because the system is complicated. These are the IDPs, and also people about who we shouldn't be forgetting, those people who reside on occupied territories. They either cannot leave their homes, or in order to get their pensions and social payments, they have to cross the checking points from time to time. And the rights to receive such payment is again tied up to the place of registration, because they are registered in the occupied territories. I would like to give the floor to the representatives of the CEDOS think tank.
Good morning. In the next half an hour, we will briefly describe the outcomes of our research. When Liudmyla Yankina came to us with the idea to have this survey, we understood that the provision about residential registration is important for everybody, because I think any person in this country experienced situations when they had to prove, to show the proof that they are registered somewhere. At the beginning of our survey, we assumed that a quite big part of population does not register their residence, and that this may have a negative impact on some of their behaviors. First of all, we found out that there is no exact data, there is no statistics data showing how many people do not survive, do not live in the places when they are registered. But we questioned 1,200 people in 9 regions and found out that more than 30% of people reside not in the places when they are registered. But this cannot be extrapolated to the entire country. Also, we reviewed the assessment of the National Demographic Institute, and they assume that 13% of the Kyiv residents are not registered in Kyiv. They are registered somewhere else. We found out that during the last years, some 114,000 people inside the country had changed their place of residence within 1 year. At the same time, the International Migration Organization suggests that there is a bigger number of migrants because this state statistics focuses on the time period of 1 year, while the International Migration Organization does not indicate the time frames. Also, the State Statistics Service, which collects data from the places of residence, suggests that people between 15 and 29 years of age migrate the most oftenly, but we suggest that between 18 and 64 years people migrate most, and the bigger part of labor migrants are between the 34 and 64 years of age. When we look at the statistics, international statistics data, which is red line, we see that within the last 2 years, migration inside the country had dropped, which seems surprising, but because we know the numbers of IDPs. But the issue is that IDPs are permanently registered in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, and if we include them, you see this big difference in light blue columns. Thus, the demographic data does not see the most proactive people who travel looking for jobs, and they do not see IDPs who were forced to leave their places of permanent residence. Why do we need this assessment of the number of population? Because making assumptions about potential budget expenses, we take into consideration the data about population. When we tried to analyze the scope of the problem, we understood that residence registration is widely used in public administration, in budgeting, in voting systems, in security and order systems, in delivery of social services system, etc. So the between census, the registration is the main tool for assessment of the number of population, and when one person moves from one place to another without changing official registration, the state statistics does not see this person in its new location. This data are very important for budgeting at the local level. At the local level, the state expenses are allocated, and these expenses are transferred to the local level in per capita calculation. And on the account of local budgets, healthcare services, education, social protection, and social provision are funded. They are important for all people. Till recent past, the local budgets were limited in their possibilities to collect these revenues, the revenues for these expenses, collecting just local taxes. Latest changes in the budget code allowed to extend the tax base for local revenues, but the bigger part of local budgets originate from the state budget due to the internal local transfers. And when we looked at the mechanism, how this transfers from the central budget to the local budget takes place, we clearly see that the amounts are calculated based on the numbers of population. First of all, this is true about medical subvention, which is allocated based on the number of people and age of those people, and also the basic anti-depression subsidy, which is also calculated based on per capita level. And another important element is social protection subvention, which is targeting some specific receivers of the services, and the state need to understand clearly where the specific people are residing at this very moment. And when we look at the services which involve obligatory information about registration, residence registration, we have this table. Red, green stripes show the those services which does not need information about registration. Yellow columns show which need to, which require them, and the red which obligatory require them.
It is important for the state to know it to allocate money to all the territories, but for some spheres there's no single e-register of all service receivers, which would allow to easily transfer these services from one district to another region. Another sphere where the registration plays an important role is the sphere of elections. People who do not have registration, they cannot participate in elections, and those who live not at the place of registration can participate in presidential and parliamentary elections, but cannot participate in local elections. In the sphere of judiciary, the registration plays more of an additional role in the legislation. There's no clear connection to the place of residence or registration, but and registration of the place of residence plays a very important role in the process of documenting, because now, until recently, all the information on people, on their place of location was on paper carriers, but it is important to have means which would allow to understand where the person is in order to clearly define the number of population living on a certain territory. And so the registration of the place of residence plays a key role when introducing data to the single demographic register based on the data of the registers of territorial communities. I will talk about how the process of registration and deregistration is taking place. Several regulations were mentioned, but we can say that registration, this idea of registration appeared back in 1932. It's almost 400 years we've been living with this system. In 2001, there was a decision made by the Constitutional Court that Luda mentioned that recognized that there should be no system of registration based on permits. And the order, the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers does not correspond to the Constitution, does not correspond to Article 24, Article 4 on the principle of equality between all the citizens, also Article 34, which guarantees the freedom of movement, and Article 64, which prohibits any limitation of the human rights. After that, we had the process of gradual liberalization, registration of the place of residence. There were several regulations passed, the law on the freedom of movement and free choice of the place of living, of residence in 2016 in April. Finally, the system of registration of the place of residence acquired the form which it has today. The functions of registration were transferred either to the centers of administrative services or another body. When there is a need to register the place of residence, probably each one saw it in your life. There are examples when people have to register their place of residence more often. That is labor, educational migration, when people go to study or to work to some other region of Ukraine. Lease of housing, if people move to some settlement, they have a chance to register their new place of residence. Buying the housing. When buying a housing, you can register the place of residence. This could be compulsory or non-compulsory. If a person has two or more places, the person has the right not to get registered in this place. Then also entering into inheritance, that is, if the person inherits some housing, and if this is the only residence where a person can live, then the person gets registered there. Moving to a dormitory, usually the students get registered at dormitories. This procedure is very simple. You don't need any additional permits. But when you're leasing the house, the procedure is much more, housing, the procedure is much more complicated. Because lease means that there is the consent of the owner as well. The change of marital status, it could be entering into marriage or canceling the marriage, maybe when children move away from parents. And I would like to mention a little bit more about lease of housing or accommodation. That's most typical example when a person moves to another city and cannot get the place of residence registered, because in Ukraine there are some myths and fears. People very often identify the lease of the housing with the possibility to acquire the ownership by the leaseholder. But these two things are not related to each other. And the registration of the place of residence just confirms where the person lives. Then the problem is the person, for example, the lease agreement expired, but if the person refuses to move out, then the ruling of the court is needed. That creates additional problems. And this big category of people cannot get registered, but without that, the person has limited access to different services. Now I will move to the procedure for registering the place of residence. This procedure is quite simplified. We can register that with the local authority or TSNAP. What documents are required? The application should mention that the owner of the housing is not against the registration of such a person. In practice, the problem is that there should be also the written consent of this owner. Then the passport is needed. What's needed is the confirmation of the right of residence. It could be the lease agreement or some other documents which give the right to use this housing. You need to pay 12 hryvnias 33 kopecks, which is the state duty, and for men they have to submit the military card. We have some ambiguous understanding of the process of registration. There are some contradictions in the legislation.
В Україні та зразків необхідних для цього документів, які норми якого суперечать новому. Потім попросили говорити трошки тихіше. Потрібно, як я казав, вираження.
According to the law, the documents are to be submitted which confirm the right for residence. Also, you can register the place of staying. This is registered when a person resides for less than 6 months, but in practice this is not registered. We got the confirmation of that by different methods. We talked to people who worked in passport departments, and they confirmed that this is not done now. But also because people do not register the place of residence. Because of that, there is the registration of the place of residence. On the other hand, there is an actual place of residence.
Разом з
As to the process of registration, as to the process of removing from registration, it's much simpler than the registration itself. You need fewer documents. The application is sufficient, or it could be the ruling of the courts, a death certificate, but in fact there are some limitations which concern some categories. Children, first of all, minors. If the person wants to deregister a child, you need the approval of the special state bodies, because you cannot worsen the housing conditions for a child.
є імперативна.
There is an imperative norm that children till 10, if they live at the place of residence of parents, they are registered there. Before they are 14, they can be registered not just with parents but with close relatives. Also, there are difficulties with deregistration. If a person doesn't want to deregister, then the court ruling is needed, and then there is a norm when the person cannot be deregistered. If a person refuses from the right to privatize the housing and is registered there, and that housing was resold several times, then this person is registered there, and it influences the price of the housing. These are the cases which complicate the process of deregistration. And in fact, the owners do not want to allow the registration of people who lease the housing. Good afternoon to everyone now. Another interesting part of our survey. CEDOS think tank has done a high-quality sociological research. We had 50 interviews, expert interviews. We had focus groups, and we did media monitoring of electronic mass media, professional websites of lawyers, and content analysis of social networks, Contact, Facebook, and Twitter. And we researched what's the attitude of population to that. On the other hand, what are the strategies of behavior of the population when they register their place of residence and deregister.
When we just started our survey, we were interested to know, first of all, whether there is general opinion in the society as to the residence registration, whether people believe it is a problem, whether if it is, for which categories it is the problem. The next issue which we would like to clarify was the behavior strategies in all the life situations. For us, it was interesting to know why some categories of people do not register their place of residence. So we have chosen the quality survey. That is, we were not interested in representation, but in the broad number of views and ideas. there is a theory of Ukrainian sociologists Lavacha and Panin that all Ukrainian social institutions have dual status. On the one hand, there is the status described in the legislation about this institution, and another status is the actual status in the society, and in parallel there are two orders, two statuses which exist in parallel, but they are not seen as a problem in the society. So this our survey was aimed at clarification whether there is any difference between these two visions in society. So the methodology, the snowball approach based on gender and age indicators. We collected in-depth interviews with people who live in the places of registration, in the places where they are not registered with IDPs, people without citizenship, and people residing in the occupied territories was studied via expert opinions. And also we held two focus groups. One group of those people who live unregistered in Kiev, and the group of IDPs. Now we come to the outputs of our survey. Whether there is any opinion in society about place of registration. We found out that there is no unified idea about residence registration in society. When you try to organize the interview, people used to say that what is the problem? I do not see any. These are among people who live with they are registered. Then monitoring of social network. Content analysis had shown that almost 47% of references about this residence registration, these are just advertising about delivery of the residence registration by some intermediaries, brokers. Also, our media monitoring had shown that media do not mention this issue and do not cover it. For majority of population, the registration is an event which can happen once or twice per life period, and this is due to the low mobility of population. Also, at the level of the ordinary person, people do not understand what does the residence registration entail. People just see the registration stamp in their passports, and sometimes it can become a problem, but no more. There are some categories of population for whom registration is a problem, and they recognize it immediately. These are people not residing in their residence in their registration places, IDPs, foreigners, and non-residents, and people in the occupied territories. For them, this registration becomes a problem because of limited services. As for social discrimination, by 2014, we had no discrimination related to residence registration, but with the appearance of IDPs, we have got this type of discrimination. This is this happens when IDPs try to rent premises. What did people mention in the in-depth interviews? The first limitation due to the residence registration or non-registration is impossibility to attend the local clinic, medical clinic, local hospital. People have to write down special applications, and people try to submit such applications, and they tend not to go to doctors. The second limitation are administrative services. There is some number of services which could be obtained only in place of your registration. But it is not so offensive as non-possibility to apply for medical services. The third limitation is participation in elections. When it comes to the national elections, the legislation provides a possibility for voting in another location, not where you are not registered. But as for local elections, then only registered voters can vote. This is maybe violating the right of IDPs. When a person had spent some years in the city of Kyiv, for example, it has gained the identity as a Kyivite, but it cannot vote. This person cannot vote for Kyiv mayor or Kyiv city administration. Also, there is a problem, there is specific problem with those people who are registered in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. And so the issue with IDPs have the problem which is rather deeper. When an IDP from Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast try to apply for medical services, for example, in Kyiv, they are immediately asked, where is your IDP certificate? While there is big group of people who moved from Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast to Kyiv, for example, before 2014. Another issue is expats and foreigners. What is the problem for an expat? when such person arrives to Ukraine having no relatives, he or she has to find the place of residence. The landlords do not wish to register these expats in their premises, so they have to use the services of some intermediaries or brokers. The Roma population also has the same problem. The second part of our findings, why people do not register their place of residence. People mentioned that the procedure is complicated, cumbersome. The biggest problem is submission of all required documents. They have to collect all the documents first. They have to come to agreement with the landlords from whom they rent premises, come all together to this registration office. The second difficulty is that people living in big cities, in small cities, have lesser problems with registration than people residing in big cities. It's easier to find the chairman of the village council or mayor in a small city or officer. Also, we held our anti-corruption check. We checked this everyday level or surrounding corruption. You can pay somehow to the can pay a bit more to the registrator, and he would do this more quickly. Some people mentioned that in the registration offices, they did not we want money. They just they were asked to bring some stationery. Having no time to go to buy the stationery, they just, for example, folders, they just gave money to these officers. Also in SNAP, people experience problems. The employees are people say that the employees are counterproductive. The second issue, after cumbersome procedure, is that all those people who live in the leased apartments, they are not registered. And we asked many landlords whether they would register any leases in their flats or houses. And people and the owners definitely said no. That's there are risks. They may gain some right of property. also the registration in rent premises could happen only based on the lease contract, and this entails taxation. We haven't heard this from our informers, but we believe this is one of the reasons why people are not registered in the rent premises. What to do? When you discuss with somebody this registration, people suggest to cancel it in general.
Registration is present everywhere. And in the world, there are no models where there would be no registration of the place of residence. Very often people talk about the US, but in the US there is the place of registration. But today's model of the place of registration is not effective, and something needs to be done. During the survey, during the research, we saw that people are not registered because they have some limitations. They cannot get registered because either the procedure is too complicated or the owners of the housing do not want to give such a permit. But on the other hand, the place of residence is important for a person to get administrative services. There are two strategies, and the first one
Послуги, ну, більшість послуг вони відв'язані, але щодо прив'язка до місця реєстрації. Що це значить? Що отримуючи якусь адміністративну послугу, тобі потрібно показати, придивити свій паспорт, відповідно, де є зареєстроване місце проживання. Хоча ти можеш і отримати цю послугу в будь-якому населеному пункті України. Для цього потрібно, тому щоб, власне, відв'язати адміністративні послуги від реєстрації місця проживання, потрібно внести ці точкові зміни, поскасовувати цю прив'язку до реєстрації місця проживання. Ну, а з іншої сторони, потрібно розвивати центр надання адміністративних послуг і потрібно удосконалювати реєстри. В першу чергу мова йде про єдиний демографічний реєстр, потрібно надати територіальним громадам доступ до нього, і потрібно забезпечити стабільне фінансування. Далі що стосується соціальних послуг. Соціальні послуги, взагалі чіткої прив'язки до реєстрації місця проживання немає, крім надання медичної допомоги. Ну, але зараз вже мова йде про те, що запускається реформа медична, і, можливо, буде діяти принцип, що гроші йдуть за пацієнтом, тобто людина зможе отримати медичну допомогу в будь-якому медичному закладі. Ну, але проблема в тому, що від кількості пацієнтів, які звертаються в якусь лікарню, залежить, власне, бюджет цієї лікарні. І дуже важливо в перехідний період розрахувати правильне навантаження і спланувати фінансування лікарні. Що стосується надання освітніх послуг, то чіткої прив'язки немає до можливості отримання освіти. В дитячих садках взагалі немає ніякої прив'язки, але на практиці ми знаємо, як це відбувається, що в великих містах є величезні черги, і мотивують те, що ми не можемо прийняти вашу дитину, бо ви тут не проживаєте, відповідно, корупція і тому подібне. Що стосується середньої освіти, то дитина може навчатися в будь-якому закладі, але якщо є черга, то перевага буде надаватися тим, хто проживають в відповідній адміністративній одиниці. Що стосується соціальних сплат, то громадяни можуть отримувати соціальні виплати незалежно від місця реєстрації, але дуже часто для отримання відповідних соціальних виплат потрібно пред'явити довідку про склад сім'ї, яка надається на підставі того, скільки осіб зареєстровані за відповідною адресою. Також реєстрація місця проживання, вона впливає на виборче право. Це дуже яскраво видно на прикладі внутрішньопереміщених осіб, і, власне, внутрішньопереміщені особи це може стати тим стимулом, щоб внести якісь зміни, тому що наше дослідження показує, що бажання вносити такі зміни немає ні серед представників влади, ні серед представників Центральної виборчої комісії. Стосується тут тільки місцевих виборів, тому що на національних виборах, в принципі, можна проголосувати не за місцем реєстрації. Далі також підсудність. Підсудність, мається на увазі територіальна підсудність, тобто справа розглядається за місцем проживання відповідача. Ми не вважаємо, що потрібно якісь вносити зміни, тобто існування територіальної підсудності, це загально визнаний принцип, він існує всюди, але, як показали наші спілкування, зокрема із представниками Данської ради біженців, які тут присутні, що є в окремих випадках проблема, це в першу чергу стосується внутрішньопереміщених осіб, тому що на сьогодні є дуже багато внутрішньопереміщених осіб, які проживають далеко від Донецької і Луганської області, але їхні справи повинні розглядатися в судах, відповідно, переміщених, які знаходяться в Донецькій і Луганській області. Тепер інший варіант – це ми можемо створити стимули, щоб особи, які проживають не за місцем реєстрації, могли реєструватися. Власне, такими стимулами може бути отримання якихось соціальних виплат, може бути якісь субсидії, тобто повинні якісь бути бонуси. Але проблема в тому, що це потребує, по-перше, додаткових витрат, по-друге, невідомо, які це може понести як наслідок зловживання. Великі проблеми, як ми побачили, це з орендою. Що ми можемо зробити, власне, з орендою? Ми можемо, по-перше, легалізувати ринок оренди, але проблема в тому, що легалізація ринку оренди, вона може призвести до того, що ціни на оренду виростуть, і, відповідно, ми не зможемо вивести ринок оренди з тіні. Може бути тут і жорсткий варіант, це, власне, створення реєстрів орендованого житла і накладання, відповідно, штрафів. Хоча і сьогодні досить великі штрафи, але там від 17 тисяч гривень. Але це не стимулює, як ми бачимо, орендодавців виходити з тіні. Також, як третій варіант, ми подумали, що можна було ввести поняття центру життєвих інтересів, це взагалі поняття із податкового права, і це на базі цього поняття дати можливість людям реєструватися не за місцем проживання, а, власне, за центром життєвих інтересів. Тобто, наприклад, так як, наприклад, відбувається зміна місця голосування на національних виборах. Тобто, якщо ти звертаєшся в суд, ти повинен довести суду, чому ти хочеш проголосувати в іншому населеному пункті, і ти заводиш це на підставі того, що ти працюєш тут, в тебе якісь є там, сплачуєш податки, ти можеш проживати. І, відповідно, так само можна було б на підставі якихось вторинних доказів реєструватися за відповідною адресою. Так, все. Я передаю.
Основна...
The main idea is new mechanisms of work of the system of registration of place of residence could be about the registration that should not be the instrument of discrimination of the person, but the person should be able with minimum steps to receive such a service and not feel as not needed. When the person now comes to any state, to any authority, they don't know where to go. We don't have any transparency. We have no clear guidelines for an individual. The system itself is not transparent, and this guideline, how to understand the system, how to act within this. We need more transparency, and the mechanisms are to be developed. A person is a client, and
тому що вона існує
the system should act in the interests of the person. And also people from Crimea talking about the instruments of discrimination. The person who's registered in Crimea now is not resident of the country because they have Crimean residence. This is not acceptable in our country if we want to be the democratic state that is in civilized manner interacting. Such things are not acceptable. Another partner of the project Center of Policy and Analysis, Analytical Reforms, and thank you, Viktor Tymoschuk is an expert of this center. When this research was made, for me this topic is very important, and many rights of the citizens are tied up to the place of residence, and such services as receiving the passport, receiving the ID, medical clinics, schools, but some of them are just in practice. It's like the law doesn't hamper, but still people look into the passport. But that's not just the problem for people, it's the problem for the state, because our state doesn't have the correct registers of the citizens. The state doesn't know where to look for a criminal, for example, because many people live elsewhere, not where they are registered. We have such a thing as artificial migration in times of subsidies. People get registered to get into the rules. You've heard the statistical data, and I believe that 30% is close, and that is the problem. And the situation with IDPs is a good example, which forced us to think that the state made more liberal regime for IDPs. It's not the registration of the place of residence, but all their rights are tied up to declared place of residence. And we need to use that. And another thing, the registration of the place of residence, this is the duty. There is an administrative responsibility for that. If you do not register in time, you do not pay fine, but you have to pay higher fee. This week, for example, we received a letter from a serviceman who retired, and because he retired, he lost his residence within the military unit. All his family lives with the relatives, and the relatives do not want to get them registered. We have an awful situation.
На житло, право оренди.
If the state doesn't guarantee housing, then they have no right to require the registration. I believe we need to cancel the administrative responsibility. If the person doesn't want to be registered, the person will not enjoy all the rights, but we cannot fine for that. Talking about the reason of today's chaos, the main reason is the procedure of registration. It's not like in Soviet times. To leave the village, you had to go to the head of party organization and ask for a permission to go to the city to study. But now to register the place of residence is difficult because you have to bring many documents which confirm that you have the right for this housing, for this accommodation. And there are two options. First of all, it's to disconnect all spheres from the place of residence or to simplify the procedure of residence. Like it's happening in Poland, in Germany, in Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, the person informs where he or she resides. Sometimes you need to mention the name of the owner of the accommodation, but in Ukrainian conditions I would balance it by a big administrative fine if the person lies and registers at some address, but the state finds out that this is a lie, then a big administrative lie. A simple application and then responsibility. Then I believe that we have distorted the system, like registration of physical entrepreneurs, you just you don't need to confirm where you reside because you got plenty of debts, and then the tax police starts looking for you and there's no person at the address mentioned. I'm grateful to colleagues. They help us identify the risk zones, and there are many risks like communal payments, communal services, subsidies, rights of children. I believe the nonsense is that the owners cannot dispose of their property normally. There's a presumption that all the parents want to eat up their children or whatever. And talking about civil servants, people are unhappy with the civil servants because they pay 2,000 hryvnias to civil servants and they want them to be experts in all types of law. To understand who could be registered or who could not be registered, for that you need to be a mega lawyer. Another recipe, if our state decides on the principle of informing, I would prohibit to the tax office to check the leases of the housing. Let's legalize the residence of people. The countries that I mentioned, their legislation is called not about place of residence, but about declaration. I believe the 4th of April was a revolutionary step. We transferred this function to the local authorities. Now the person doesn't need to go from a village to a town for some administrative service. They can do it in local authorities, and that could be done in 15-20 minutes. Then the quality of this service differs in regions. There are Rivne and Ivano-Frankivsk where everything's fine, or there is a Kiev where it is a hell.
Вважаю, що саме другий крок – це спрощення процедури.
And another step is simplification of the procedure.
I can see Mr. Zelenko here, who contributes much effort to improving the registers of residence, to computerize it. And I would like to sum up that we are worth of declarative principle. What do we have now? The double standards of coexistence of the state and the citizen. On the one hand, we have the law, which declares some standards. We have the procedure, but in practice, it does not work properly. We have a big abyss between how the state functions for the people and the actual situation of those people who try to interact with the state. Before beginning this survey, we carried out 2 searches, and the first discrete search was studying the situation, and the second discrete search was to study the international practices. We found out that we are very much different from other countries. While in foreign countries, they study this the Soviet phenomena as propiska, we do not know how to deal with it. Quite often people do not know the law because the law is written in vague language, in a language which is not understandable for people. The second is that people do not trust the laws because they definitely know that there are double standards in legislation and how it's in reality. I think jointly with the government institutions, we should develop the public awareness campaign and encourage people to study the legislation. This would improve the situation. When we tried to understand what motivates people in everyday life, for example, in relations between lessee and lessor, we understood in terms of premises. We found out that there are a lot of legends and myths, not the real legislation. People base their considerations on mass media. Also, people quite often know that the registration, residential legislation is an object of commerce. People do not know the law. People base their considerations on the old Soviet approach. With this, I would like to give the floor to Tetyana Pechonchyk. I would like to thank to our colleagues for this interesting survey. But if you wish to understand the scope of the problem, you may go to Google and you immediately would find hundreds of companies which offer registration for money. This suggests that the residence registration in Ukraine is inefficient, and there are hundreds of small firms offering commercial registration, which anywhere distorts the situation. Expats cannot get their residence certificates, and quite often this becomes a problem for expats. The owners of leased premises, they do not give this permit and for registration. There is quite big number of people who have no registration at all, and quite often this is due to the procedure which does not allow them. And a lot of people reside in one place and are registered in other place, and they are deprived from from many services and from voters' rights. I recollect the last local elections in Ukraine, and only 30% of local residents voted. Let us look at one of the reasons. I've been living in Kyiv for 16 years while I'm registered in Rivne. I have no motivation to vote there. While here in Kyiv, I am deprived from the right to vote in Kyiv. An example of my husband, the bank took our flat because of the debt and inability to pay for it, and we are registered nowhere. That's why the ambitious objective of our organization of many organizations here is to improve this center, to make it a man-centered and do not allow the bureaucrats or intermediaries to earn from this system. We cannot repeal the residence registration because local authorities need to know how many people reside in their locations. Actually, we have to change our approach to residence registration. Now it has the permit style character. We have to change it for informative. One more result of the system inefficiency is that person pays twice. Once a citizen pays taxes on government bureaucrats, and then it has to apply to the commercial firms which provide the registration service for money. Of course, we do not wish to say that we have exhausted the topic. I hope that we made just the first step in this direction. We invite to cooperation the state agencies who are interested in the problem solution. And before Q&A session, I would like to say what will be next. We will provide you with our presentations. We invite you to comment We have some people who disagreed with parts of our presentation. We are open to your comments, remarks, and after today's event, by the end of the year, we will have expert roadshow, involve experts from the regions. In Ukraine, we have sufficient number of experts who may contribute to drafting of the new legislative initiative, and then we will draft the law, which we hope will become a real life. Thank you for your assistance in our survey. Maybe you have some questions. Natalia. Good afternoon. Lugansk human rights activist.
I would like to ask, there was an information that Mr. Rozenko offered to implement such regulation on pension so that the place of residence does not influence getting the pension. Is that related to your survey? What do you think about that? Thank you for your question. This is a good question, and I would like to continue. It's good that Mr. Rozenko expressed this necessity, but I would like to say one thing. Without the change of the system of registration, any reform inside which there is a registration will take place. We need to work on our registers, first of all. Article 12 of the law on the protection of rights of IDPs. We need to create the e-register. No one has seen it, and that needs to be done to introduce further changes. Then there will be no passport reform if we do not bring to order the system of registration. There are representatives of Migration Service. Please hear us. The passport reform will not take place if there is no reform of decentralization and the reform of with the place of residence. All these reforms are to happen simultaneously. This is a big picture. Everything is interrelated. You cannot implement one reform without implementing others. No more questions. One more question. Thank you for this opportunity to say a few words. I'm Amilchuk Vasil. I am the advocate of the human rights, and I accept the position of Tetyana, who said that the person should be in the center. But it's not a criticism. I would like to give some recommendations to authors. I fail to understand who ordered your program. Is that your own initiative, or are you working for some state institution? And second, what I believe is insufficient in some theses, you referred to foreign experience. It would be great if there were some foreign experience. France, Belgium, we are on the threshold of such processes, and we need to take that into account. I'm ready for cooperation, and I will be helping you. Thank you. I will try to answer as to the international experience. It's an open access. I will send you a link, and you will see the results of that desk research. Your first question, who ordered? We are the initiators of this research. Before starting it, we suggested to the state authorities to be the initiator and to start doing it. But we did not hear any consent, we did not see any initiative, and that's why we initiatives. But I would like to thank the Ministry of Temporary Occupied Territories for support, and they are the major beneficiaries of the results. So we are working with them. They, as the ministry, they started their work somewhat later than we started our work on research. When they existed, we came to them with the proposal on cooperation, and they agreed because they need this data. And again, I would like to call upon state bodies to cooperate. The reaction is somewhat late. We would like to see a more proactive position. We have a vision of how this could be done, and we are ready to share. But we call up for constructive cooperation without thinking about who's the first one and whose results these will be. This will be joint results. When we started that research, we first of all addressed people to NGOs, and we had a very constructive cooperation, and to state bodies. Our practice shows that there's a big gap in understanding of how the law acts and how it acts. The representatives of authorities think that the way the law is drafted, it works the same way, but in practice it's not so. Thank you. Thank you. Unfortunately, the time is over, so thank you. See you again.
Дякуємо, дорогі колеги.